My name is Mark Donovan. I'm a 44-year-old small-town schoolteacher living in Springfield, Illinois. Over the years, I've come to learn that one of the most powerful weapons we possess as human beings isn't our ability to argue or our skill in debating others. It's silence. Calm, collected, deliberate silence. It took me many painful experiences, especially with toxic people in my life, to understand that silence speaks louder than words ever could. This is the story of how I learned that lesson, and why it changed everything. For years, I believed I had to speak up to defend myself, whether at work, at home, or in public. When someone crossed the line, I thought my voice was my shield. And in some cases it worked. But not when it came to dealing with toxic people. Those who drain your energy, manipulate your emotions, or twist your words to benefit themselves. They don't play by normal rules. They thrive on chaos, conflict, and control. And when you engage them with words, you're walking right into their trap. Started with my first job teaching high school English. I was fresh out of grad school, optimistic, eager, and a little too trusting. The department head, Sharon Mills, was respected by everyone, but behind closed doors she was impossible. She used her authority to belittle junior teachers. She never raised her voice, never swore. But her words were poison. She'd offer a compliment and coat it in subtle judgment. "Your students are energetic," she'd say, "but they seem a bit unfocused. Maybe you're not used to handling teenagers." It would sting, but not enough to call out. And if you did call her out, she'd act shocked and innocent. I tried confronting her once in a department meeting. I told her I felt like she was undermining me in front of the others. She blinked slowly, then looked at the rest of the staff. "Mark seems to be taking things too personally again," she said with a condescending smile. "Let's focus on what's best for the students." Just like that, I became the sensitive one, the troublemaker. I walked right into her trap. Years passed, and I learned to avoid her games. I stayed polite, did my job, and eventually outlasted her. But that experience stuck with me. It taught me that you don't always win with louder arguments or clever comebacks. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is say nothing and walk away. That lesson came back to me in full force when I married Rachel. Rachel and I met through mutual friends at a 4th of July barbecue. She was smart, funny, and beautiful. Things moved fast. Within 6 months, we were living together. A year later, we got married. At first, I ignored the red flags. How she'd sulk if I didn't agree with her, how she'd twist my words in arguments, or how she made me feel like everything was always my fault. I chalked it up to stress or said we just needed time to adjust. But over time, her behavior grew worse. One minute she'd shower me with love. The next she'd accuse me of being distant or uncaring. I found myself constantly apologizing for things I hadn't even done. If I came home late from work, she'd say, "It's fine. I'm used to being alone," and then stare silently at her phone for hours. If I tried to explain, she'd cut me off. "You always have an excuse." I started questioning myself. Was I too focused on work? Was I being selfish? I stopped seeing friends, thinking maybe I needed to invest more time in the relationship. But no matter what I did, it was never enough. The turning point came one Sunday morning. I had planned a quiet breakfast for us. I cooked pancakes, made coffee, even brought out fresh berries because she liked them. She came downstairs, looked at the table and said, "You couldn't even clean the kitchen first?" I felt the blood drain from my face. That morning was supposed to be an effort to show love. And it still wasn't enough. I didn't respond. I just stood there. For the first time, I didn't defend myself, didn't apologize. I looked at her and said nothing. That silence, it wasn't passive. It wasn't weak. It was powerful. Because in that moment, I stopped giving her power over my emotions. She stared at me, expecting a reaction. But I didn't give her one. And she hated it. Toxic people hate silence. They need your energy, your anger, your guilt, your explanations, to feed their sense of control. When you stop speaking, you starve their ego. It didn't happen overnight, but that was the beginning of my awakening. I started setting boundaries. I didn't explain every decision. I stopped apologizing for existing. And I embraced the power of silence, not as avoidance but as strength. Eventually Rachel and I separated. She moved out and I found peace in the quiet. My home became a sanctuary again. And I began to rebuild my life, this time with intention. One of the hardest parts of dealing with toxic people is learning that not every battle is worth fighting. When someone lies about you, mocks you, or tries to provoke you, your instinct is to fire back. But all that does is pull you into their chaos. My brother Kevin is a perfect example. For years, he manipulated our parents into thinking he was the responsible one and I was the careless dreamer. He'd show up to family dinners and say things like, "Well, I guess some of us have to work real jobs, because I chose teaching over corporate life." I used to argue with him, trying to prove I was just as hardworking. Never worked. One Thanksgiving he made another snide comment, and I felt the old anger rising. But this time I didn't say a word. I looked at him, smiled, and kept eating. Later that night my dad came up to me and said, "I noticed you didn't respond to Kevin tonight. That was classy." He nodded. Silence had done what years of words couldn't. I've since taught this to my students, especially when they deal with bullies or peer pressure. You don't have to respond to everything, I tell them. Sometimes your silence is your boundary. This doesn't mean tolerating abuse or bottling up emotions. It means choosing your responses with purpose. Silence can say, "I won't engage in drama." Silence can say, "I see what you're doing and I won't play that game." Silence can say, "You don't have control over me." Now, whenever I face someone toxic, whether it's at work, in social circles, or even online, I take a breath, remind myself of my worth, and often I say nothing. That silence doesn't make me weak. Makes me free. There was a young student named Claire in my class a few years ago. Bright, talented, but constantly bullied by a few classmates. One day she came to me and said, "I keep trying to tell them to stop, but it just gets worse." I told her what I'd learned. Sometimes the best thing you can do is not give them the reaction they want. So she tried it. The next time they mocked her, she stayed calm. She didn't argue, didn't cry. She smiled and turned away. Slowly the bullying stopped. Without fuel, their fire went out. She wrote me a note at the end of the year. "Thank you for teaching me that silence isn't weakness. It's wisdom." Looking back, I realized that all the pain I endured, from Sharon, from Rachel, from Kevin, wasn't for nothing. It led me to one of life's most powerful truths. Words can be twisted, but silence is unshakable. It can't be misquoted, distorted, or manipulated. It's yours, and no one can take it from you. So, if you're dealing with someone who constantly drains your energy, belittles your worth, or thrives on conflict, consider this. You don't always need to win the argument. You don't have to justify,